Well, welcome everyone to this Saturday afternoon, evenings cycle of the Aquarian series. And as you all know, these meetings are being um, in honor of the Aquarian Almanac, um, which was a regular document that was produced every year by one of the ULT lodges. And there is a whole new staff of people who maintain the Aquarian Almanac now, and they keep it up to date. The Aquarian series is based primarily on the second object of the Theosophical movement. And that's the idea that, well, the first object is to create a nucleus of universal brotherhood. And the second object has to do with creating a forum in which the study of ancient and modern religions, philosophies, and sciences can be studied. And the idea is the open-mindedness and the open-heartedness of such a study to find the wisdom in everything. It'd be like maybe a miner looking for gold in a mountain. They find a vein and then they follow that vein of gold, etc. So that's what this Aquarian series is like. And so the Aquarian Almanac honors all the main religious holidays, festivities, um, religious occasions, and so forth. But it also honors discoveries of science that have been going on over the last several centuries. And it honors great poets and literary luminaries, etc. And also great reformers such as M.K. Gandhi. And today we will hear a presentation on truth and nonviolence. And we will be privileged to hear from Brian Seymour. But before I tell you much more about him, I'm going to share my screen here and just give you a little rundown. So today, truth and nonviolence, I'll just go ahead and read the quote from Hermes for this week. It says, there is a level of energy released by love that is conjoined with a profound reverence for truth per se. So now I would like to introduce Brian Seymour. He currently, by the way, he's Miluka's son-in-law, just so you know. And she is really proud of him. He's been talking about him for months and months. And here's his brief bio. Brian Seymour currently resides in Los Angeles. He attended CSU Northridge. He obtained a double major in geography and environmental science, and also in religious studies. You know, a lot of the most amazing people are doing that these days. It's like a parallel. Currently, he is in pursuit of graduate school with intentions of becoming a university professor, and he is a U.S. Coast Guard veteran. His personal interests are the study of religions, environmental topics, outdoor adventures, and sports activities. So without any further ado, here's Brian.
Before Brian, we're going to have
right.
a short
I'm sorry
talk.
about that, Miluka.
So, no,
Yeah,
no worry, no worry. It's very brief.
my fault.
No worries.
You
So,
got, yeah.
so thank you very much for this invitation, and I hope you enjoyed. It's going to be, I think, very, very inspiring presentation. So I'm going to just show a couple of clips and a movie trailer from Candy's movie that was nominated and won many, many Oscars, and it was awarded all over the world. And then after we finish with the clip, then Brian will will continue with his presentation. So here we go.
Please. Yeah. Do you want to make that full screen, Miluka?
The object of this massive tribute died as he had always lived, a private man without wealth, without property, without official title or office. Mahatma Gandhi was not the commander of armies, nor a ruler of vast lands. He could not boast any scientific achievement or artistic gift. Yet men, governments, dignitaries from all over the world have joined hands today to pay homage to this little brown man in the loincloth who led his country to freedom. In the words of General George C. Marshall, the American Secretary of State, Mahatma Gandhi has become the spokesman for the conscience of all mankind. He was a man who made humility and simple truth more powerful than empires. And Albert Einstein added, generations to come will scarce believe that such a one as this, ever in flesh and blood, walked upon this earth.
Thank you, Maluka, for presenting that for us. A little context and a background for everything. Oh. A little context and background of everything. Me and Maluka had, for the few months I've talked about trying to put something together. And when we made a trip to UCLA and we went to a little presentation about Mahatma Gandhi, and also its correlations with Jainism, we had saw some really great presenters about Mahatma and his truth and his philosophy, such as Satyagraha, and their and all the additional context where the groups had met in the middle. So for this approach that I guess I would be for this presentation is based off of his autobiography. After our visit to the presentation at UCLA, she gifted me his autobiography. And when we decided that we were going to do this presentation, I asked myself, like, how would I approach presenting this man's message and his life story? And just to be frank, there is so much historical context in this and just a small portion of his life that I will be presenting on, that it's too much to kind of condense all within a 15, 25-minute presentation. So whenever we discuss Gandhi today, I mainly used his autobiography as a reference point. I try to utilize his words and his words alone. That doesn't mean that I didn't look into other academic sources, and also watching documentaries on him. Again, the amount of things that this man had on his daily agenda would, put us all to shame for like our week, our goals of the week. But if I can, let me share screen and we can go ahead and get started. And also I want to kind of make note of a few things. I took this approach from a historical and also a theologian approach, since we're all students of religion, I feel we all appreciate our history and our approach towards theology and our liberating ideas compared to what institutional religion puts together and tries to present to make you feel that you have to follow a particular path or find a a certain means that only like one shoe fits all technique. I didn't appreciate it growing up, although I believed in it. I believed in the theory at the time. Years later, thankfully, I was disabused, would be my key word right here. And I say disabused because Mahatma Gandhi uses the same word in one of my favorite chapters, which deals with theosophy. So for this, I take a historical approach. The man was born in India, had went to England for Barrister School, which is a lawyer, and then he had went to South Africa shortly after him passing the bar and spending just a short period back in India, not realizing he didn't understand Indian law all that well. He kind of wanted to escape, and that's actually what led to him being in South Africa. As per the theological approach, I would like to point out certain key points of his life where we discuss certain incidents that, had influence on who he became. So he was compared to Buddha. He was compared to Christ. He paved the way for social influencers and changers like MLK and Cesar Chavez. If you're not familiar with MLK, there was a presentation done, I believe it was last year before last, where they did a compared study where it was Mahatma Gandhi and MLK, and I believe she's in the Theosophy Society sitting next to Jonathan. Forgive me, I'm blanking on a name. So, but I watched her both, and she did wonderful presentations. So, in the book, it describes, I think this is the best description of Mahatma Gandhi, and from a humbled opinion. He was called a humble seeker of truth. And I think that's one thing that myself, Maluka, Jonathan, and everybody else that I've yet to see and talk to, I think we all have that same desire to seek truth. And lastly, and we'll touch on this at the very end, he was able to bridge the gap between secular and mundane. And when I say he was able to bridge that gap, which the secular is the sacred, it's the divine, it's what we seek for, our spiritual essence, and the mundane kind of being a materialistic world, the drama of everything. He was able to close that gap and try to live more of a life of the sacred. He really did see the divine in each soul. Like, he was against the caste system. He was actually exiled from his own community because of his life choices that he made. And so, like, that just kind of shows you what character this is. And this isn't like a lot of the modern or liberal thinking. This is, late 19th century caste systems where, we'll find that he gets married at 13 years old, and that's just a part of the community. Why wouldn't that go back? Oh, okay. Sorry, everybody. A Tale of Truth of Nonviolence, Mahatma Gandhi. The quote goes, "My life is my message." The story behind that is that there's an American reporter that runs up to Mahatma, and he goes to train. He says, "Mahatma, give me the message to send back to the people." And Mahatma grabs a piece of paper and gives it off to the reporter, and he opens up and it says, "My life is my message." That's not the only version I saw, but that's the one that I'm going to stick to, because that was my first impression of Gandhi initially. Before then, I knew nothing of the man other than seeing his picture and knowing him by name. But that's how influential figure he was. He's recognizable as Ronald McDonald in some circles. For our overview of topics, we'll identify the results of his experiments with truth and ahimsa that led to his philosophy of satyagraha. We'll look at periods of his childhood from birth to 15 years old, a period during his young adulthood, 16 to 23, and his adult age from 24 to 46 on his return to India. And I would stop there, and I will humbly say, like, as per my knowledge, from what I read from his words alone, I can only speak between these periods. Anything else, like of his other campaigns of Satyagraha, which he had several. I think the most notable is the Salt March, that I have yet to kind of really dig into deeply. But as for these periods, this is what I read. This is what I felt were significant moments for his experiments with truth and ahimsa. And then afterwards, we'll have a discussion and conclusion. But to start, we see a quote. It says by Gandhi, "Thus God laid the foundations of my life in South Africa and sowed the seed of the fight for national respect." Several times he admits that within South Africa, where he was in Johannesburg, really was his influential and his greatest experience with his experiments with truth, and what really, eventually produced Satyagraha. But I want to make sure that we get to know this man before he kind of put on, they say, the cloth. And then as we go from here, we can slowly work up through the years. And, one day we'll get to that presentation. But for now, let's figure out who the man was before he put on the white robe. He was born October 2nd, 1869, to Kurumchad and Putabai in Pordunder, Gujarat. Forgive me for my my butchering of my names, but that's just kind of the devil we're dealing with. This is a western portion of West India. This western portion of India is heavily influenced in Jainism, which we'll talk about a little bit, but we'll get to that when we get to it. In 1882, at the age of 13, he was forced to an arranged marriage to his wife Katsubai. In 1888, in late September, Mohan had left for England to become a barrister, leaving his wife and newborn. He was advised on this trip. He was advised to go be a barrister, and we'll get into that. In 1893, his travels in Africa, he experienced racial discrimination of himself and also on the indentured laborers. We'll talk about the train incident, which is a big highlight of his point many people discuss. In 1894, Gandhi decides to stay and to fight against a discrimination act against the Indians and their voting rights. In 1906 was the birth of Satyagraha. This principle was initiated into action as a weapon. Mind you, this is a weapon, not a passive resistance idea or philosophy. This is a weapon against the Asiatic Registration Act in South Africa. And that is basically where the indentured laborers were having to register themselves, but also in turn not being allowed to vote who decides their laws and who decides their means of living, or the laws they abide by. In 1915, Mahatma Gandhi returns to India. His dharma thus became liberating the people from India from British rule. He had saw that there was an oppression by the crown. And mind you, up to almost that point in 1915, he was a loyalist to the crown. He supported British troops in the Boer War and also the Zulu Rebellion, which we'll briefly touch on. The Salt Satyagraha in 1930 was, the one that really got him the global attention. He marches to Arabian Sea, which is a 240-mile walk. He, in solidarity, grabs a handful of salt and sells it off. And he shows the Indian people that, like, this is our land. We've been here for, thousands of years. We've sowed the seed in this land. This is ours. And even finding in some of his work, like, he would disapprove of speaking English. Like, they would only speak native Gujarat, or I can't think of the other Hindu language, but they were particular on, like, they had to show that this is an Indian movement, that this is an Indian struggle, and that the colonists who were over the landscape were not, were not there to be a part of their resistance. There were some outside sources. There were white men. There, I'm sure, were other women. I, again, would speak out of term if I said Hindi. Thank you, Judy. But again, we'll stay on point. 1942, the Quit India movement resolution was enacted by the Indian Congress. Civil disorder ensued. Thousands were killed by firings, and others were injured. And also during this time, Gandhi was jailed for his actions, and also his wife had died in prison alongside him. In 1947, India had gained independence from British rule. As a result, violence had ensued by the Muslims and Hindus. Mass migration followed, with, I think a total amount of 500,000 people dying. So even though India gained independence, you can see that there was the Muslims wanted to have their own separate state, and that's where Pakistan would eventually be. And it had really the country had split itself. In 1948, Gandhi was killed on January 30th by Hindu nationalist Nathuraman Godse. Gandhi was 78 years old. And I think many of us know his last words on his lips before he died was Ram. And that was kind of his ultimate test to himself. If he was a true Mahatma, he would ensure that every step or every action he did was for for the higher truth, and that would be God, as we find out here shortly. So where do ahimsa and a truth come from? Well, let's figure out what these are. Mahatma Gandhi held ahimsa, which stands for nonviolence, and truth as one and the same. Only through ahimsa can the ideal life be achieved, and self-realization or moksha can be obtained by the divine. Mahatma Gandhi realizes the search for truth is pointless if ahimsa is not at the base. Ahimsa is a concept derived from ancient Vedic texts, Buddhism, and Jainism. And Jainism is known to be the one who's kind of helped develop that the most, with their 24 Tirthankara being the one choosing ahimsa to be the supreme principle of that religion. Ahimsa is becoming in harmony with the universe by avoiding violence caused in everyday life, living and exhibit any types of violence in thoughts, words, and deeds on sentient beings. As the saying goes, to keep this as simple as possible, to hurt another being is to hurt oneself. And these beings are, just keep it simple, livestock animals, where hence the vegan diet comes into play, and not eating a certain degree of living being has its consequences in the world of karma and how it's seen. But getting just the definition of how Gandhi defines ahimsa and also defines truth, these are taken straight from his autobiography. He says, ahimsa is a comprehensive principle. We are helpless mortals caught in the conflagellation of himsa, which is violence. The saying that life lives on life has a deep meaning in it. Man cannot for a moment live without consciously committing outward ahimsa. The very fact of his living, eating, drinking, and moving about necessarily involves some himsa. Destruction of life, be it so minute, man can never be entirely free of ahimsa. And just a quick rundown of the development of ahimsa. There is a degree that this group will go towards when it comes to mitigating violence in communities. And obviously, as different sects have branched off, there's certain degrees in which the ascetic monks take. And just for the people that are leading this particular religion, monks, some walk around naked, and that is a part of the culture, and only having 1 to 2 items. Some don't even have a bowl. They only eat out of hands because they are literally getting rid of all materialistic items. So it shows you the degree in which certain people have gone. And obviously with Gandhi, he went to a pretty far degree, seeing that all I think that he considered that he owned was, I think, his clothing, his silks, wheel that he has right there in the picture, and I believe his literature of the Gita. I'm not sure if he had anything else, but those are the only things that have come to my mind from what I've seen and heard. For the definition of truth, for me, truth is a sovereign principle which includes numerous other principles. This truth is not only truthfulness in word, but truthfulness in thought also, and not only relative truth of our conception, but absolute truth, the eternal principle that is God. His manifestations are innumerable. I worship God as truth only. And going back to Jainism real quick, because this is such a key portion of how he sees, the nature of reality, is very much in comparison with how the Bhagavad Gita describes how there's multiple manifestations of God, and like the principles in each religion all carry similar principles. And one of the things that Gandhi would always promote is the unification of religions. He was, a friend of the Sikhs. He was a friend of the Muslims, the Hindus, and he has multiple different Christian acquaintances, several in which that like come in and out of his life at different times. And, in England, especially, him even going to Christian worship, he did strive to try to see God in all aspects of life, and obviously religion being a key part of that. So to look at some of the experiences he had in his childhood, and mind you, when we look at these different experiments, keep in mind why, or I guess hold in mind the question is, why would Gandhi put this in his autobiography? He doesn't write it like an autobiography. He writes about his experiments with truth. And these are some of the experiments that he talks about. And in each one of these, he states that there is truth within each of these chapters in which he writes. And we know that we just said that with truth, the root of truth is ahimsa. So we are finding in each of these examples somewhere where ultimate truth or nonviolence is one and the same. And he is able to see that truth in these experiments that he gives or he discusses. So for his parents, he has lived by example. His father, Karamchand, held discourse with religious brothers and Parsis, Muslims, and Jains. Mahatma would state that his family were serious Vaishnavites with heavy influence of regional Jainism, whose supreme religion is nonviolence and share similar diet traditions as fellow Hindus. His interest in religion would develop later in life, and that's due to an influence of a certain theosophy book. His mother, though, he revered as a saint and spoke of her highly with all of her spiritual practices, fasting, and willpower. And there's a funny story of where, as kids, they would, ask her, they were worried about her because she wasn't eating during the raining season and she would only eat when the sun would show. And she would respond and state, well, God did not want me to eat today. And, just that simple statement of faith, putting her, her livelihood, we have to eat to survive, to continue on. That's how much faith this woman had. She was highly regarded within the community and also attended daily worship. But I think probably the first initial example of ahimsa that Gandhi discusses in his autobiography is when he discusses running around with his troublesome mate, Sharif Mehtab, had influence on him. He, had him start eating meat, smoking cigarettes, and stealing copper and gold. And he, to convince this man to eat meat is because he's telling them that the Englishmen eat meat and they're strong and powerful over the Indian man. And that shows you the mindset of where he was at as a 15-year-old. He saw that the Englishman was in power versus the native Indian man. So he was susceptible to these things, as all 15 and 16-year-olds are. But, after kind of having a come to Jesus moment, as you would say, Mohan decides to confess his sins to his father for his guilt. And in return, his bedridden father tears up the note in which was given to him telling him, confessing of his sins, and he remained silent. And Mahatma Gandhi states that this was not only his father's love and forgiveness, but a prime example of pure ahimsa. Just thinking of our own mothers and fathers when we did something and we felt guilty and we finally confessed, like we knew we were going to get like a stern talking to, some a little swipe on the behind, just depending on the degree. But that's a pretty big, that's a pretty great example of showing, endless compassion and love for a son is, forgiving something that easily. Which shortly after this, he talks about the death of his father. At age 16, shortly after being relieved by his uncle, Mohan met to meet with his wife. While having sex during this brief period, his father passes, leaving Mohan feeling ashamed and miserable. He calls it a blot, unable to forget, and the experience becomes a shaping agent in his decisions later in life to assume the vow of brahmacharya, which we will talk about. And the vow of brahmacharya is a vow of celibacy, which is a serious vow to take, and generally only religious men or ascetics will take this particular vow because as a father, as a family man, there are there are certain things that are expected, and I think when we discuss it later we'll find out why this was so influential. But at 19, Mavji Dev, a highly regarded advisor of the family, assured Mohan that England and Barsha School was the adequate means of sustaining a living. Mohan sought after the blessing of his elders in Portdunder, only to be rerouted back to his mother, who alone could give him permission, because his mother was against it to begin with, and he felt that he needed to go see his elders and an uncle of his to get the okay to go ahead. And his uncle actually sent him right back to his mother, which was the funny part. So he had to journey all the way around just to go back to get her permission. She only allowed it on the advisement of a Jain monk, Pracharin Swami, who administered an oath. These vows taken by Mohan were to abstain from wine, women, and meat. I guess she was a bit superstitious and a little worried about him being consumed by the white man. In his second year, though, Gandhi had become an advisor of sorts on the Gita's original translation, which was Sanskrit, for who he calls the Theosophy brothers. And they had a lot of influence on him at this time. They also prescribed further readings, such as The Light of Asia by Sir Edwin Arnold, and also Madame Blavatsky's Key to Theosophy. And he states this in his autobiography. He writes about the effects of HPB's writing. Gandhi states her writings disabuse him of the notion of superstition in Hinduism. So that's pretty impressive that he had his own reserved thoughts and feelings about his own religion, about his own culture. And it took her writings to kind of change that mindset. So that's pretty substantial, because if it wasn't for that point, like, would he have held his prejudices against his own culture and people, and kind of kept coming the Englishman, because he was taking violin, he was taking dance lessons, wearing top hats. He really thought he was trying to acclimate to that way of living. And at this point, he was also impressed by the Sermon on the Mount. It was the book of Matthew, in which he states that kind of embodies true Christianity and the approach towards evil. And he states, he compared the Gita and the New Testament of the Bible, along with the Light of Asia, all together. Like, at that time in his life, he was really trying to unify all of those three teachings. And I think at this point in his life, and even probably towards the end, the Theosophy saying goes, there is no religion higher than truth. And that's well said by that motto. So now we got to his experience with truth as an adult. This is up to his age of 46. As he gets to South Africa in 1893, after returning to England, struggling to make it as a barrister in England, Gandhi accepted clerical work in South Africa. While en route to Pretoria, he was discriminated against and was thrown off the train. This event was his initiation into fighting racial discrimination in South Africa. I think if anyone has heard of Gandhi and, learned of his principles and his philosophies of Satyagraha, I'm sure this point has been mentioned several times. He was out in the cold, shivering, and, he asked himself, like, do I go back home with my tail between my legs, or do I stay and fight? And obviously he stayed and fight because that's just his character, who we've already kind of looked at some certain points of who he's kind of becoming essentially as an adult. But initially, when Gandhi was set to leave South Africa after he completed his trial, he decided to stay and fight. It was his going away party that he had glanced at a news article and saw that they were trying to pass a law to deprive Indians of their voting rights. And he couldn't stand for this. And so he knew that he had to stay further. So at this point, we can consider the foundations in South Africa were laid, and groups that he helped create, like the Natal Indian Congress, was formed. At that point, his life dharma was to serve the Indian people of South Africa. He remained there for 20 additional years. He created new relationships with different cultures and groups, while even still creating his own community, like this Phoenix settlement. And although he didn't get to visit the Phoenix settlement as much, he was later able to start the Tolstoy Farms, which wasn't as far from Johannesburg, because, mind you, he was still practicing law during this time, kind of fighting against a lot of the prejudices that were happening. And I like this point. I kind of put this in here, just because I find it is very applicable in what we're talking about. Due to the ill effects of the Zulu rebellion in 1906, Mahatma realized to fulfill his dharma and serve humanity with his entirety, the vow of brahmacharya was required. This restricted Gandhi to the highest degrees of celibacy, a true test of self-restraint in thoughts and actions. The vow was seen by Gandhi as a prerequisite to Satyagraha in 1906. So at this point, I'm kind of wanting to just discuss the Satyagraha and how it's defined. It was created by Mahatma and another individual who's kind of spacing on me a little bit, but it was an Indian prescribed word, so there's no English equivalent to its translation, because when they came up with the word, it was initially spelled Sady, Agraha, and Mahatma changed it to stand for the truth, and also Agraha converts to firmness. But it was really to represent the struggle of the Indian population and to kind of gain that national self-respect that we talked about earlier. This Satyagraha was declared by Gandhi in opposition to the registration of the Indians. Whenever he had got the gathering and people were frustrated with how there were laws being passed that was oppression against him, he had at that point, a good voice of the people, and decided that we were going to assert truth through nonviolence and be non-compliant with the laws that were being oppressed against them by the British. And you can see in 1916 and 1929, there's multiple different points in where he used this technique of Satyagraha in these different at these different points of him being in South Africa. And for discussion, because I've talked plenty and probably long enough and need to take a seat, I'm very much open to questions, but I only offer the first one, and then there were other points which we didn't hit on that if anyone wants to ask questions about, we can maybe kind of see how they're related to the nonviolence. and then if there's anything else, we can go from there. So I open the floor to anybody that wants to add anything new, or thank you, Judy, for raising a hand. That is most helpful.
Hello, yes. I guess I just have a point which is in part a question, but I understand that Mohan Karamchand Gandhi really didn't like to be called Mahatma because it means great soul. And theosophically speaking, he wasn't a Mahatma. He was an amazingly good man and a great leader, but he liked to be called Bapu, father, and his friends called him Mohan. It's even in the movie about it. So the question really, what is a Mahatma? Well, a Mahatma is really a perfected being, and Gandhi makes it very clear in his autobiography that he's not perfect, and yet he considers himself searching for perfection and truth, and for him, God is truth. Although I think it's wrong. A colleague once said to me, well, truth is God to Gandhi, and therefore he's an atheist. Gandhi was not an atheist, but don't you think that he did more than anyone else in India to try to unify all the religions? But he failed to do this with the tragic separation of India and Pakistan. So I think we need to address that as to why he wasn't totally successful in that. It broke his heart, and in the end.
Okay, so do you want to address the violence that ensued after he helped India gain its independence?
Well, really,
What
why did he fail? He even pleaded with Muhammad Ali Jinnah to keep India and Pakistan together and be prime minister and appoint a Muslim cabinet. I mean, he was willing to give up any kind of Hindu rule. And of course, now it's gone the opposite way in India. There's this.
Okay,
well, toward the Muslims. It's awful.
Okay, well, for this presentation, I was just kind of staying within this period up to the point when he was in India, but just kind of talking about, or just kind of addressing like maybe the issue of like him being called Mahatma and him feeling a failure and, criticizing himself in the way he did. I think we really need to just kind of think about like how we would put him into context as like a human being. Like, I don't see a whole lot of social activism to this degree where he motivated millions of people, that where he was a friend of Muslims and Hindus and Sikhs, where he was a lover of all. He said he saw the divine in everybody, just as Mother Teresa would be. Mother Teresa is not called Mahatma, but you would call her an enlightened person. When he's compared to Christ and Buddha, we can see the humanness in that, can't we? Like, we see actual videos and stuff of him, but of Buddha and Christ, we have just writings and stories and different various versions of degrees. You were correct. The split between the states where Pakistan and India did split, he did cause that. And like I said, 500,000 people did die because of it. And it did send him into a pretty bad state of depression. And for him to feel like that's on his shoulders, how dare we, the public, make him feel so guilty for wanting to have his own native countrymen stand on their own feet and fight for their liberation? Although, like, again, there was violence ensued, and there was the mass shooting of there was a mass shooting of the Indian group that had happened, that ensued even more encouragement for the liberation because they were suppressed so much. But there are several people in life that can have a lot of negative things to say, and they wouldn't be incorrect factually of like what happened as a negative effect. But standing on the moral ground of like what is truth, what is humane, and like what is equal to all people, he didn't see a caste system. He was against the institution of British Empire rule. And I would say that like he was authentic as much as he could be, but no one truly knows the results, or let me phrase that. No one knows the fruits of their labor until like the fruit is rotten. Like when India became independent, it wasn't a big show. It was a lot of fighting, a lot of killing, a lot of mass migration. But then when he died, he became the martyr. We can call Mahatma a martyr, or we can call him Baba, which he was the father of the independence movement. But we can call several significant people many different names. The good, who we consider that like made good social movement, and there's been a lot of people that have made a lot of bad social movement, and there are people that get held in higher standards when their morals aren't a quarter of what this man proved through fasting, through spiritual work, through religious and social activism. If that addresses the question.
Of course.
Okay.
Let's hear from both of you.
We have another question or another raised hand. Maybe I'm not doing this right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Maluka.
It's okay. No, I was thinking that, he was a great example. I thank you very much. It was an excellent presentation. I enjoy. I'm pretty sure a lot of people did too. A lot of information, a lot of history, and you make so very, very interesting points as well. He, for me, represented, regardless what he's called, he was one with the path. That's what we're supposed to aim as human beings if we really want to achieve the realization of that union with our higher self. So he was one with the path. And what a better example. I don't know if there exists any other example in modern times, so even back then, that will be as close as he did. And he obviously he was a messenger. We don't really know who Gandhi really was. We really don't know. Like sometimes we don't know who HPV who really was. So I think it's just a matter of actions speak louder than words. And
well, he was a seeker of truth. Yeah, and he was a seeker of truth, wasn't he? Like, if we're going to say like exactly who he was just like us. He was seeking for ultimate truth, for a higher truth.
And it's too bad that he was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize many, many times, but he never got it for politics. And thank you.
Is it showing up?
We have a hand over.
Does anybody else? Oh.
Yeah, go ahead, Monica.
Yes, Brian, thank you so much. This was a tremendous amount of information, and you gave it to us in such clarity. I truly appreciate that. I just would like, I guess, to tag on to what Maluka was just saying. The thing that I felt when I got to say a little about Mahatma Gandhi, and in particular, the big, what was to his mind a failure between the Hindu and the Muslim, was a big disappointment for him. But I think that all of this was rooted in his desire to somehow transfer to the people at large a state of consciousness that he attained. Who knows how many lifetimes he had come to that state of consciousness when he was thrown off that train. But it helped him to find a self-respect that is not rooted in a law degree or a mode of dress or anything external. It would seem to this student that what he found and verified and added to by Madame Blavatsky, that what he found, that his true identity was all he needed to stand firm in peaceful mode, so that all of these externals could not match the glory of the truth of what man is. And I think that this was a bit of a disappointment for him, that he was not able to somehow help the Hindu and the Muslim to go beyond what we are in this physical to some of that state of consciousness. And so I just wanted to add that. But he I also think that this is the reason why he had such a powerful impact on Dr. Martin Luther King, because abuse of every kind in the physical world, it's still what is transcendent is man knowing that he is divine. And so Dr. King, I believe, got that message very powerfully and clearly, that if one is anchored in that truth, truly anchored in it, that is the force that begins to make change. And so his disappointment with the Hindus and the Muslims, I think, was rooted in that. But this presentation was just wonderful, and I thank you. I just wanted to make that point.
Thank you. Well said. I mean, I don't know how else better to say it myself. There's numerous people in which this man has that has inspired. You know, we said Martin Luther King, Cesar Chavez, myself included. I would hope others to be able to see his message and kind of be able to see like his humanness. There are obviously results, there are consequences to our actions, and kind of if we want to get on a talk, our karma is the result of our actions in past and previous lives, and also our current lives. And if this man didn't strive to have a clean record before he met God, he died with God's name on his lips. He says that he walked a knife edge. Like this man laid a razor thin path that not many would try to follow. And that's why I talk about, that's why, I would like to ask anybody that can give a straightforward answer to this question. What was Gandhi ultimately striving for during his life? Like there's something that he states that he was ultimately looking for. Does anyone know what that is? We got one. Robert, sir, go ahead.
Well, I don't claim to be any kind of expert here, but after years and years.
Who can?
Yeah, really. It seems, he was a Raj Yogi. He was actually searching for enlightenment. That was the ultimate goal. But he saw this not, as theosophically, not as a personal triumph, but as working for the enlightenment of humanity. So that's, the absolute truth idea is enlightenment, is the merging into the one universal life. So that was his goal. And it seems to me. And so he had that yogic discipline. And there were only a few, well, there could be quite a number, but I mean, relative to the population at large, there's only a few that could really participate in that rigorous discipline and be true satyagrahis. And, we have to admire, like Vinoba Bhave, those members of his team that were true yogis, truly disciplined so that they could be nonviolent. So I think that if you think of him that way, then the rest of his life kind of falls into place. But anyhow, that's just some few reflections. And thank you very much. It's always wonderful to look back at, like you said, his life is his message. And that's the humbling part, is that he was so good at manifesting what he believed in, not separating theory and practice.
Yes, absolutely. He, you could say he put his money where his mouth was. Sometimes, like when he said he was going to do something, he didn't allow, the ego trip to kind of take over. But just to add a little bit more to what you're saying, true, he was looking for enlightenment. What he states in his introduction, he says, "What I want to achieve, what I've been striving for and pinning to achieve these 30 years is self-realization, to see God face to face, to obtain moksha." So, moksha is the release from samsara, and it's to be one with the divine and to find that union. So it really, each action that he took daily was in that greater pursuit. And not many times I think I found myself waking up with that intention in mind. Like, what are my intentions today? Like, what do I want to achieve? And like, how do I want to approach it? And to think that if each action or every thought or event that was to occur throughout the day, that I had to keep Ram on the lips for any moment to be ready for that, that for that bell to go off. Few had done that, and few had done that as authentically as he did. And he showed this through his examples with, his diet. He showed the example when he realized some of his realizations about the effects of war and the Zulu rebellion, how it made him feel about himself and his position over others, his wife specifically. And as an educator, he talks about it a little bit, and he describes that he would have liked to have been an educator, but he was kind of against the institutional system. And there at the Phoenix settlement, and Tolstoy, they had their own educators, and their different means of living in their communal life was different from society and the norm. And so, I mean, these guys were, him and his community were, they were the outsiders. They were, much like Christ. They were kind of like the Mavericks going against, the institution who was in rule at the time. They were doing all these great enlightening things, and they were living simplistic lives and saying like, hey man, like, this is what we need to strive for. It's striving for moksha in life. We need to stop this like divide and conquer, or kill or be killed mentality. He saw it through he saw it through like political means of changing things. And like when that wasn't enough, he obviously had to act. He had to be the first one to register himself. And he was assaulted when he tried to give in to Colonel Smuts. He was assaulted. He'd been like a couple of times. He had a couple of assaults. One almost led to his death, the one I'm referring to. And like for him to be ready for that moment, like he knew that he was going to be a martyr, like, like Christ was. And to compare him to that, it would only, in just a respectful manner, I don't know what else you would want to call or, be at somebody, be at somebody's beck and call, like a man like this. Whatever he would want, I'm sure was given to him. David, please interrupt.
Okay.
Excuse me, not interrupt. I kid.
Yeah, thanks.
Jump in, please. Thank you.
Yeah. I think you really hit on the point. You were talking about Christ. There's confusion often with people who study the New Testament, because here's Jesus, love thy neighbor, the doctrine of love.
Turn the other cheek. Turn the other cheek.
Turn the other cheek.
That's it.
But what does it say in Matthew? He says, I don't come to bring peace, I bring a sword. And it talks about father turning against son and mother against daughter. And I don't think Gandhi failed at all. I think just the civilization wasn't ready for that higher vision, between the religions. Yeah. So I just want to make a comment. I mean,
well said.
Anyway. Yeah.
No, well said. Like you said, like we bring a weapon, and like going to his philosophy of Satyagraha, his nonviolence, the non-reactive means, like people were killed, people were hurt, and it wasn't, some of it was by their own hands. Remember, Gandhi was killed by a Hindu. They read the same, Vedic text. Like they all, so it's interesting when you kind of put it like that. And you kind of do the comparison and you're like, he was a martyr. He was, the individual that did cause this, global rift. Like, I mean, if a whole world knew about this man back in the day, think about this world and how fast, like, media can be shared and the influence. Like, I mean, as silly as it sounds, Taylor Swift tells people to go vote. Thousands of people register to vote. What kind of influence does she have? And mind you, I don't know much about her and all the background, but I know who she is, obviously, and the influence that person has versus this person. If you would imagine that there are these individuals out there, and there obviously are in a lot of different religions, people have found that unification into their own people. There was a story while I was doing this research, the Pope had went and visited all of his diasporic communities, and he had gone to some of these places where Christianity had been alive and thriving, but they weren't recognized. Gandhi had went to South Africa where people were being, disregarded. They were being dehumanized. He gave them that, he gave them their rights. He gave them, the ability to stand up for themselves. And as a Babo, as a father, if anyone is a father in this room, I'm yet to be one, soon will be though. But I imagine having to instill the principle of like you having to pick yourself up by your own bootstraps, or having to take action when it's needed and not be a slouch and allow yourself to be rolled over or walked on. There is a degree like where you have to stand up for yourself and you have to take your agency that we have as humans. We know that we have agency, whether it's free or not is a debate for a whole nother day. But we know that if we choose to walk a path, we will walk that path. We do not know what are the consequences or what may come on that path, but we know that we are treading that path in our own illusion and walking it in, with our truth in hand. And I feel like that's what he did. He took his truth, he manifested it, the Satyagraha movement, and he gained, millions, billions of people's admirations and respect. And obviously he had enough influence of a culture, of a community to where we're still having these types of discussions. If religion is morality, then like we can look at a lot of religions and be like, where's the moral in that one? And it's there, but you kind of got to get through the weeds here and there a little bit. But if there's anything else, I have one last closing slide, and then I will be done. So if there's any comments, questions, concerns, disgruntled individuals who hated everything I said, please feel free to say them now or hold your peace.
Brian, can you hear me or not?
I can.
Okay, I was testing my own sound system here at the lodge. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. You know, he has had his detractors, and it seems fine that people want to do that. But I always say to them, you know, that he wasn't perfect or whatever, and all these things. I always say to them, really, did Einstein, he couldn't even believe it, that you walked the earth in flesh and blood? Did Einstein ever say that about you? And, he created the world's largest democracy. Did you create the world's largest democracy? Mm-hmm. You know, and India happens to be more population than China right now. Not that that matters, but I'm just saying the largest country on earth, he created, got the independence for. So in terms of, that's pretty remarkable. And I can see you've kind of caught fire with him, you know, it's just the way you're presenting. So you've caught fire. And, but I was going to talk about, go back on his humility, on his side of it. Okay. Because I think there's something to be said for the masses to think that he's a Mahatma, because it's wonderful for people to adore greatness, you know. But on his side of it, he wasn't into that. And my question has to do with experiments with truth. And you, Brian, have kind of double majored on the science side of things and on the religious studies side of things. And experiments with truth, that's like saying that there's a scientific side to the pursuit of wisdom and so forth. And he did a lot of his experiments had to do with ahimsa as like the means, truth being the end, I would think. I was wondering if you could say anything about that in terms of this whole idea of experiments, because it's not him saying, hey, look at me, behold, I know. He's like, let's try this and see what can be learned. I was wondering if you could speak about that.
Sure. You know, the reason why he calls it an experiment is because he approaches these different incidents in life as, you know, as a scientist. He's not trying to skew the research. He's not trying to get a particular answer for like a method. Like, you know, there's no black and white to it, you know. They're kind of open-ended a little bit, and we all kind of see, you know, very common, similar truth in certain stories, and we can see like, yes, this period affected his life versus this period more or another. But like, there's in each chapter, he says that there is a lesson that can be obtained in each one of these. There's, you know, the results are what they are. And he wasn't, you know, he didn't shy away about like his embarrassment with, you know, the prostitute. There was, you know, when he talks about the death of his mother, there wasn't any detail on that. There, you know, there were certain things you're like, man, like that's, how do you not want to digress into that and kind of figure out like how this influenced him and like what it did. That's why I tried to stay true to his word and just kind of take that approach and be like, I don't want the influences of how others think and feel about like what his message was. What does he actually have to say? And like, how do I interpret it without trying to get too many different mixed signals from others? Because like, you know, if you look at his if you just look at his time with the Theosophy group, there's multiple times that he had, you know, had discussions. He had met Blavatsky as well. Like there are certain things that maybe can be said from other sources about how his interpretations or his meetings with her influenced him. There's multiple different ways that we can all see truth and like how it influences us and like what exactly we want to take from it. But I tried to only stick with what he gave in his words. I appreciate the acknowledgement for going on the scientific and then going on the religious studies side. You know, my truth would be that I see that there are both are necessary, and I see that there is truth in science and there is truth in religion, and like there is a unification of these two. Now, where that line is sometimes is drawn very thinly. You know, it's interesting, obviously, some of the conversations you can get into with, you know, what is scientific and like what is truth, and like but that would be a different conversation for a different day. But we can see that both are needed to kind of bridge the gap, and it's discouraging when there are parties on both sides who discourage really productive work in science and then also in religion, because we can see both have, you know, a huge amount of influence in who we are socially, who we are as individuals, and like what we're really striving for. You know, being somewhat of an environmentalist, like I'm really wanting to turn things around in certain aspects of how things are going for us, because it's a little discouraging. The religious side of me kind of feels like, well, here we go again, you know, another cycle of like, you know, we'll just do it all over again in the grand scheme of things. You know, if karma is real and samsara is real, like we're just probably on one of the last cogs coming around back over again. That's just the name of the game. So to kind of sit in the middle between both those worlds is a bit of a challenge, and I feel there are many who can do that appropriately. So I hope I did okay with everything that I've said here today. But let me just get to my last slide, and then I'll be I will be done out of here. Thank you guys for your kind messages as well. To conclude in a reflection, we tend to dehumanize our idols and place them on pedestals. At times, we forget the initial events of life's journeys. Events of life's journeys can and do shape our destiny. What impresses me the most about Mahatma Gandhi was his perspective and use of humanism while seeking for the ultimate truth. In his vigorous conflicts, Gandhi maintained the moral high ground in which he stood on as the highest form of truth. This truth was of ahimsa, through ahimsa and being of service to others, he strived daily for moksha, the ultimate realization of truth. Mahatma Gandhi challenged the status quo and woke the social consciousness of a nation and the global population. Because of the sacrifices he made for humankind, he was able to present a method of nonviolence to society that maintains morality as supreme. And I think in our times today, morality is sometimes scarce, and it's kind of hard to find that neighborly, brotherly love in which we all would like to imagine seeing. But at the end of the day, as soon as we close our doors and shut our blinds, you know, we close up, and we really don't show that as much as we should. And with as many things that are happening now globally, this would be the time that we start opening our doors to our brothers and sisters and showing them love and compassion in in an appropriate, respectful manner. I think would be wise. Somebody had a hand up. I had a word. Nope, maybe not. Okay, and that's it. Thank you guys for giving me the time and the podium, as they say. I greatly appreciate it.
Miluka?
Hi.
Do you have any final, like it's kind of a British custom to offer a vote of thanks. Do you think you could do that for Brian?
Well, we're certainly inspired by your words. You spoke from your heart, and obviously your intuition, see, is working. Sometimes we put to a test. They say we test it all the time. So to pass they say gold is tested by fire. and I see you pass the test. And you are surrounded by a lot of very wonderful students of theosophy, because we don't call ourselves students because we never.
Everyone's very well studied, very well studied.
And then I'm glad that you have this opportunity, and we have the opportunity to have you as well. I think you make us all proud. And Gandhi said that he saw all religions and all human beings, and he just saw love in everything and everyone, just like Mother Teresa did. So I hope that in the future we're able to see each other as with the eyes of love, not competition, not anything else, but just brotherly, sisterly, and help each other in our hard journey towards the truth. Thank you so much. Namaste.
Thanks. Good lecture.
Thank you.
Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate everyone coming and joining us.
Thank you.
Big full moon.
And thank you, Jonathan, for putting this together, and all the students.
Our pleasure.
Well, if that's it for everybody, then do we say sayonara from here?
Sayonara.
Yeah,
Sayonara. Take